Picture this, a global world, nations working together, and yet, here we are at a political crossroads. What's stirring up trouble? Well, recently the Venezuelan president was captured. That's a big deal, but why should you care? It's not just about him. It's about the ripples. The US is involved. And let's be honest, that's rarely uncontroversial. But here's the kicker. Could this arrest push away allies? Let's take a step back. International politics. It's like a high-stakes poker game. Every move matters. You see, America has been pushing for democracy, but at what cost? Countries they don't just forget. Take Carlos, for example. He's just trying to live. His country's been caught in this whirlwind. And what do politicians say? They talk about protection, freedom, and democratic values. But are those just words? Nations are watching. Cuba, Russia, these are not passive observers. They're assessing. They're questioning. Will they tilt away? The stakes feel incredibly high. Because they are. And here we are, wondering if this move, this one capture, could unravel more. Is it just about control, or is it about integrity? We'll need to dig deeper. But before we do, let this question simmer. All right, let's dive deep into the aftermath of the Venezuelan president's capture and how it reverberates across borders. First, let's understand how the US, with its actions, seems to be practicing the age-old game of isolation. You would think that in a connected world, countries would band together. But sometimes, certain decisions drive a wedge. Consider this, Elena, a small business owner, used to export textiles to neighboring countries. Now, she's facing hurdles due to political tensions, questioning the wisdom of foreign policies that might harm economic ties. So is America pushing more countries away? While the US aims to project strength and foster democracy, let's not forget the road to hell is paved with good intentions. These actions, seen as dictates, could be perceived as a veiled attempt at expanding influence. And while alliances are essential, one-sided interventions bring unintended consequences. Let's keep asking, is this the way to win friends or lose them? Let's dive into a complex geopolitical web that seems to be unraveling. The capture of the Venezuelan president was a monumental event, but was it just the tip of the iceberg? You see, this arrest has broader implications. It's not just about one man caught in the fray. Let's translate that because here's the thing. This might have, rather efficiently, pushed other countries away from the USA. Here's how it all breaks down. The power dynamics in South America are quite intricate, like a tightly wound clock, and altering them can have rippling effects. Countries like Brazil, Nicaragua, and Bolivia might reconsider their stance now. Did the US even think about how these allies might react? Or were they too focused on the prize? Take the case of Roberto, a Venezuelan displaced, working for better relations abroad. His dream was to see cooperation between nations rather than conflict. But now, his dreams seem distant, much like how the geopolitics have shifted. Here's the deal. International relations, especially with a twist as big as this, aren't won by capturing a leader. It requires dialogue, not just dominance. So maybe now we need to watch for the potential fallout, because actions like these don't just vanish. Let's dig a little deeper into the complexities of international relations following the capture of the Venezuelan president. I mean, it's not just one event, but a ripple through a web of geopolitical alignments. You might think that capturing a leader would have been a strategic win for the US, right? However, it's like playing a game of geopolitical chess. So, on the surface, it looks straightforward. But dig deeper and you realize there's more to it. Countries like Russia, China, and even some in the EU are now reevaluating their stance towards the US. And why? Because many see this move as overreaching, if not meddling. Countries don't like to be told how to interact with their neighbors, especially by a foreign power. It's as though the US thought it could impose its will without pushback. Remember Maria, a school teacher in Caracas, worried about easier access to essentials like medicine, now questioning if things will actually improve. So, in conclusion, is this capture actually beneficial? Let's dive in and unravel the tangled web surrounding the capture of Venezuela's president. This incident that's making waves across the globe echoes deeper implications, potentially pushing away nations once closer to Uncle Sam. We must consider why it happened, and more crucially, why now? Could it be that the US is flexing muscles, asserting dominance in Latin America? The narrative of justice is being sold, but isn't it curious that such actions could be interpreted as geopolitical chess? Enter Pedro, a modest shop owner from Caracas, who wonders daily if his business will survive the week, while power plays unfold above him. And let's not forget the rest of South America, which is closely watching this development. Many countries from Argentina to Peru are reevaluating their ties to the US. So where does this leave the US? Now at the center of a potential rift, facing diplomatic dilemmas from afar. Could these actions be catalyzing a shift? A shift where countries seek new alliances, perhaps even aligning with China or Russia, which are eagerly waiting on the sidelines. Let's talk about how the capture of the Venezuelan president might have just ruffled more than a few feathers. Now, you might assume that when a leader is captured, it's business as usual, but let's dig a little deeper. Take countries in Latin America, they are watching closely. They see the US's actions and wonder, could they be targeted next? Trust issues are snowballing, and the question is, can anyone really blame them? There's this gripping fear of losing autonomy, of bending to pressure. But here's an interesting example. Consider Brazil's recent stance. It's a nation with a growing voice, and they've decided to say, enough is enough. So why is this happening? Because the power dynamic isn't what it used to be. Countries are reassessing, aligning their interests differently. And who can blame them for that? Now ponder over trade relations. The US is known for robust trade, but is that enough? Trade bonds are getting tested and new alliances are being forged. For instance, China's been weaving into Latin America's economic fabric. They're filling the void with investments. It's almost like a chess game. But who is the master player? Meanwhile, public sentiment is not exactly pro-American right now. There's skepticism in the air. We see citizens demanding transparency and accountability. But really, can the US change the narrative? It's a powerful question. All right, let's unpack this whole Venezuelan president getting captured ordeal. You see, it's one of those things that's layered with a whole lot of complexities. And of course, this event might have just put a bit of a spin on US foreign relations. First off, countries in Latin America have a tightrope to walk with the US. It's not just about diplomacy, but it's also about trade, aid, and those little political favors, you know. But then, you have to ask, is the Venezuelan president such a threat that it merits capturing him? Some say yes, many say no. In fact, Pedro over there, he's one of the increasing numbers of Venezuelans who are tired of the political chaos. And then there's China, licking its chops at any US misstep in the region, ready to jump in and offer its own deals. And let's be honest, everyone loves a good deal, especially when they're already displeased with the US decisions. So really, are we about to see a shift? More countries pulling away? Even as the US tries to maintain its stronghold. Right now, it seems the narrative is blurrier than ever. The question remains. All right, listen, you might be reading the headlines and thinking everyone's got their knickers in a twist, but let's dig a little deeper. The United States, in this tangled web of diplomacy, just captured the Venezuelan president. And sure, it's not like we haven't seen drama, but this one's got layers. Peel them back, and you'll see there's more at stake here. Take a step back and think, who's counting on Venezuela? Well, for starters, China is keeping a close eye. And Russia? They're not exactly friends, but they're not enemies either. So, when the US steps in like this, who's to say it's not tipping the seesaw? But hey, what about other Latin American countries? Mexico is just there, trying to play it cool. Brazil's looking cautiously. They're watching closely, because this isn't just a game. It's life and politics intertwined. You know, in the middle of all this chaos, there's Carlos, an expat living in Miami. He calls his family every day, wondering what's next. So are we seeing a diplomatic drift? More countries turned away, turning to new allies or just hedging bets? Well, it's a bit of both. Here's where it gets interesting. While some play the waiting game, others place their chips elsewhere. But let's not forget, this move by the US is seen differently. International chessboard? You bet. It's a puzzle yet to be solved. And how it unfolds, well, that's the billion-dollar question. So, let's dive into it, shall we? You might expect that capturing the Venezuelan president would send a strong message. And indeed, it did. But is it the message they intended to send? Because here's the thing, for many countries, particularly in Latin America, this isn't just about Venezuela. It's about old wounds and the memory of American interventions and the so-called backyard policy. This approach, while maybe strategic on paper, has sparked a significant debate. Now, look at Lula, Brazil's outspoken leader, who never really minced words when it comes to US policies. He sees this as yet another instance of America's heavy hand. And he's not alone. Several countries are quietly shuffling away, appearing skeptical of the US's real intentions. Let's not forget that history has a tendency to repeat itself, doesn't it? So, when leader after leader starts questioning, what are the boundaries? Is it far-fetched to assume that some nations might see this as a move to keep Latin America under economic thumb? The portrayal of power versus protection is always tricky, and so is the future of US diplomacy in that region. You know, when we talk about international relations, actions have consequences, and the recent capture of the Venezuelan president by the US is no exception. But let's think about what this move really signifies. Is the US trying to make a point, or is there something more strategic at play? See, capturing a foreign leader is like tossing a stone in a pond. The ripples can reach far and wide and offer unintended consequences. And, once again, it raises the question, how are other countries perceiving this? Look, it's not just about Venezuela. Countries like Russia and China are watching closely. And they're no friends of the US. Yet, there are nations in South America and even Africa thinking about this move and what it means for them. I mean, can you blame them? Aren't they wondering what's next on the US's agenda? Take Alejandro, a small-town mayor back in Argentina, who suddenly fears the implications for his country's relations with the US. He's unsure what economic impacts might arise from such a bold statement of power. And Alejandro's not alone in his concerns. So, what is this? Just mere diplomatic posturing? Or a deeper underlying strategy? It's easy for countries to feel pushed away when they see unilateral actions like this. And that, right there, could be the real game changer, leading to new alliances and maybe even new adversaries. So, is the US prepared for the blowback? Countries might start reevaluating their ties. Maybe look elsewhere for support. And who knows how that changes the global stage? It's a big gamble acting this way. One misstep and the US might face a backlash it never intended. Remember, it's always the unintended ripples that go furthest. Let's dive headfirst into this tangled web of international relations because, honestly, this situation with Venezuela and its president is like watching a soap opera that just won't end. You have to ask yourself, did the US really push away more countries with this move? Let's dissect the layers of this diplomatic encore. First up, there's the perception that the US is playing the world's police. But actually, who decides what's just? A lot of countries, especially those in Latin America, see this as meddling. They're wary of external influence, redefining their sovereignty. So what happens next? Well, the ripple effect of this action is fascinating. The US could indeed alienate more allies. We've seen it happen before. History repeats itself. And guess what? This may inadvertently strengthen ties between Venezuela and other global players, like China. Remember Dave, an everyday businessman whose daily trade depends on stable relations? Well, countries are just like Dave. They're looking for stable partnerships, not unwelcome drama. The stage is set, and a huge question lingers in the air. Well, here we are at the end of our journey, and we've sifted through a narrative laden with geopolitics, power plays, and deep-rooted alliances. But has the recent capture of Venezuela's president by US forces really led to more countries turning their backs? Let's dig into what we know. On the surface, it appears clear the US actions, whatever their intentions, have perhaps pushed boundaries too far, leaving alliances strained. Countries like Russia and China have already been vocal, condemning the actions as overstepping. But why should this matter? Here's where it gets intriguing. These countries, displeased with US policies, have significant influence globally. Argentina and Brazil, previously neutral, are now re-evaluating, questioning if aligning with the US benefits their future. And let's not forget Europe. Europe. A continent trying to maintain balance between its Atlantic ties and Eurasian pressures. We've heard whispers, from Brussels to Berlin, of tensions rising and trust slowly eroding. One diplomat, let's call him Carlos, mentioned in passing that his country, smaller in size, feels overshadowed by powerful US interests. So, what does all of this mean for us, the regular folks? The narrative is shifting, opening doors for new discussions, new alignments. But let me leave you with a burning question. Could it be that the US, with all its power, might eventually find itself more isolated in the next decade?